Hi, my name is Alan Yu, and in today's session, I will be talking about using Linux-based tools with SQL Server. To provide some background, I am a program manager on the SQL engineering team. I work with engineers on delivering tools such as SSMS, SQL Operations Studio, and CLI Tools. Here is an overview of the SQL Tools family for DevOps. Our tools can be broken down into two main categories: graphical user interface, or GUI tools, and command line interface, or CLI tools. The goal for GUI tools is to act as your DevOps workbench. Meanwhile, we offer CLI tools for your automation scenarios. All of these tools work well with SQL Server running everywhere. For GUI tools, we have 4 offerings because there are many different scenarios for our users. SSMS and SSDT developers and DBAs mainly use Windows Client as their workspace and need a robust, feature-rich tool. For developers and DBAs using Windows, Linux, or Mac OS for their development environment, we offer SQL Operations Studio, which was recently announced for public preview in November, and the MS SQL extension for VS Code. For our CLI tools, we are making an effort to make these tools cross-platform and open source. I will give more detail about these tools later in this session. In a Windows ecosystem, we have 2 great GUI tools, one of which is SSMS, which is our flagship tool. We continue to have many monthly active users, and will continue to be supporting SSMS with new releases every couple months. You can continue to use SSMS to connect to SQL Server hosted on Linux. For our users who are developers and more familiar with Visual Studio, we offer SSDT, which is another Windows-only GUI tool to connect to SQL Server on Linux. This enables developers to quickly query a database without having to load up SSMS. Now, with the release of SQL Server 2017, we want to continue to bring great tools across all platforms to give you choice to interact with SQL Server anywhere. One way is to leverage VS Code, which is a popular cross-platform tool used by developers. We offer the MS SQL extension for VS Code because there are application developers who use VS Code and who occasionally need to query SQL Server for various reasons. The MS SQL extension and VS Code itself are both open source on GitHub, and we would love your feedback and contributions to iterate on this great tool. Meanwhile, SQL Operations Studio targets data developers whose job is mainly managing relational databases, and occasionally use applications coding and non-SQL languages. As mentioned before, this tool was released for public preview in November and includes many features such as a management dashboard, a great T-SQL editor with advanced coding features such as auto-suggestions, peak definition, and error diagnostics, and backup and restore dialogues. You can also build your own custom widget to manage the health of your dashboard. Our engineering work is currently all on GitHub, and we are releasing new updates on a monthly release cycle. So please try out SQL Operations Studio today. Now I will be giving a demo of SQL Operations Studio on an Ubuntu 16.04 virtual machine. So currently we have the latest version of SQL Operations Studio, and we can simply open it in our VM by typing SQL ops and then dot. And here we have SQL Operations Studio. And as you can see here, we have our Object Explorer, which you may recognize. And we want to, I guess for the purpose of this demo, we want to create our own custom insight widget based on our own custom query, and then be able to see it in our dashboard. So I'm going to first connect to our local host, which is currently a SQL Server on Linux. And I'm going to connect to it. It also has things such as recent history, and you can also connect to a specific database, and you can also attach it to a server group, such as the production server here. Here I'll click Connect. And now we are connected to our local host. And let's go look into our databases. And we have 2 databases here. We have our AdventureWorks 2014 and Northwind. And we're going to make our first query on our AdventureWorks database. So I'm going to type my query, do select star, because I want to grab specific column names, but I don't exactly remember what they are. So I'm going to use IntelliSense to help me. So select star from sales. Looks like we have that table. And now we want to grab the tax rate because we want to try to find the tax rate for different regions. And if we look through here, this is the specific name. So we just press tab, and now we have our query. And this is really helpful, especially for developers who aren't very familiar with the database, to have this type of IntelliSense. So now we're going to execute this query. And you can see here that there's lots of different columns, but the ones that we want to grab in particular is a tax rate. So first we want to have a name, and it looks like that pops up there. And we want to have the tax rate, which we have there. And now let's run it one more time. And now we have this nice format. We have our names and the tax rate for each region. And it might be nice to add a select distinct just so that there's no overlap. There we go. And now with this results set or results view, you have several options. You could save it as CSV, JSON, Excel, but we also have this function known as view as chart. So when we click on here, we have this chart viewer, which has many different chart types that you could actually choose that would best fit your data. But for now, we're going to just use horizontal bar, since this is what we want to see on our dashboard. Now, to add this to our dashboard, we're going to click Create Insight, which will give us this format, which will allow us to save this in our settings. The main thing is that there's this query file that we need to save. So let me go back to our query here in our tab. And let's save this as taxrate.sql. There will be like a replace message, since I did run this before. And now let's update this query file name to this new name, taxrate.sql. Now let's copy this and go into our settings. So let's go to this gear. Another big ask is that our customers really want to have a dark theme in SSMS, and this is a place where you could actually change it to a dark mode for SQL Operations Studio. So it's a nice customer feature to highlight. But first, let's go into our settings. So now we have two views here, and let me actually minimize this here so it's a little bit easier to read. But on the left pane, we have our default settings, which gives us some options to customize our own user settings, such as data source.connection groups, our different connections. And now we have a section for dashboard database.widgets. So this is where we're simply going to just copy over what we saved from our Insight widget before. And copy it here. And now we have updated our user settings. And to just prove that this actually worked, we'll go back to our VentureWorks database, right-click on it, and click Manage. And this is how you access your dashboard. So we click Manage, and there we go. We have a nicely formatted custom widget that will show the names as well as the tax rate for each area. And that concludes our demo for SQL Operations Studio, and we really suggest you to try this tool out yourself. CLI tools are very important to enable continuous integration and continuous deployment. MS SQL Tools, which is SQL CMD and BCP, now runs natively on Windows, Mac OS, and Linux. They are also used for interactive and non-interactive scenarios. MS SQL Scripter is a command line version of Scripting Wizard in SSMS that can dump out schema and data in SQL scripts. It is Python-based and open source, and currently in public preview. Meanwhile, MS SQL CLI is an interactive version of SQL CMD that you execute ad hoc queries with T-SQL IntelliSense in a server's terminal, which typically don't have support for GUI. It includes features such as IntelliSense, syntax highlighting, multi-line querying, and pretty formatting. It is also a great open source collaboration story and is currently in public preview. SQL Package is a tool to deploy database changes and migrate databases between on-prem and cloud. And we are planning to release this soon for public preview for Linux and Mac OS as well. Now, there may be some confusion about the overlap between SQL CMD and MS SQL CLI. SQL CMD is currently our go-to CLI tool for interactive and non-interactive scenarios, especially since it has awesome performance. However, a huge customer ask is that customers feel SQL CMD is lacking in modern interactive features. For example, generally, GUIs are used for interactive scenarios. But let's say if the GUI cannot connect to a server directly due to firewall or security reasons, then it can be difficult to use SQL CMD since it doesn't have many interactive features such as IntelliSense or syntax highlighting. Thus, we came up with MS SQL CLI by collaborating with the open source community, specifically the DB CLI organization, where our source code is currently hosted today. MS SQL CLI includes smart completion and syntax highlighting, which I will be demoing shortly. In our roadmap, we envision that MS SQL CLI covers both interactive scenarios very well and will eventually cover all automation and non-interactive scenarios that SQL CMD covers as of today. So please try this out. As a note, we will not be deprecating SQL CMD, but we'll just be leaving it alone. SQL CMD will stay in maintenance mode, while MS SQL CLI will receive feature enhancements through GitHub. Now, I'll be giving a demo of MS SQL CLI on an Ubuntu 16.04 virtual machine. Okay, now I'll be demoing MS SQL CLI. And currently it's already downloaded on my machine, but if you wanted to install it yourself, you could just type in pip install MS SQL CLI, and then you can get the latest version. So to connect to my local host, which is currently a SQL Server on Linux, I will type in MS SQL CLI, and then add -s, which is my server name, which is localhost. And then I'll add my username, which is simply SA. This allows me to put in my password. And looks like we are here. So we have the latest version, and as well as our GitHub. So there's a small little plug if you want to make any contributions or feature requests to check out our GitHub there. And the very first thing I want to show is when you think about SQL CMD, if you used it before, when it displays lots of a table with lots of columns and rows, it's not formatted in a very easy to read format. So first we'll do a command select star from sys, and as you can see, there's already IntelliSense, which is guiding me through this process. So sys.tables. Should take a little bit, and now you could see here that this is the very first record, and we could simply use our arrow key to look up and down. We could use space to skip to the next record. And then you can use Q to eventually exit it. So if you keep pressing space, you could walk through all the records, press Q, and now you're out. But let me just quickly clear my screen. And it just presents data in a lot more prettier format. So next, I'm going to connect to AdventureWorks. And you could already tell that all this IntelliSense is a lot more helpful than what SQL CMD currently provides, which it doesn't provide at all. So we'll connect to AdventureWorks 2014. And what I want to demo here is our multi-line queries. So I'm going to quickly press F3. Let's see if that gives us yes. So let me type select star as the beginning. And if you press enter here, you could basically, what multi-line queries allows you to do is makes your queries in a lot more easier to read format. So I'm going to connect to human resources.department. And then I'm going to call it as HR because this allows for me to go back up into this query and then query for very specific column names. So if I add HR dot, it displays all the different column names that I could choose in this table. So I'll choose HR.department ID, and let's do let's do group name. And then if you ever want to execute this query, you can add a semicolon, and then it can be executed. And there we go. It's very nicely formatted. We have our department ID and our group name from the human resources.department table. And we're continuing to look for more features to add to MS SQL CLI. And we would love your feedback. Other things that we want to consider is things such as special command, and that will be in the pipeline soon. Oh, and as well as piping itself. Now that we have demoed our main T-SQL editors known as SQL CMD and MS SQL CLI, now I want to talk about more of our CLI tools for data transfer. To start off, we'll start off with BCP, which is mainly used to export and import each table in a BCP format. It's very fast, but it's very complex for handling multiple tables or an entire database. It also can't really recognize relationships well, with such as primary keys and foreign keys. So we brought in a tool known as MS SQL Scripter. And MS SQL Scripter, if you may be familiar with pgdump or MySQL dump, can handle both schema and data. And the main advantage is that it can also handle relationships automatically. So the idea with MS SQL Scripter is that you execute it, and the output is always executable because it produces a T-SQL script instead of simply just dumping out the data. And what you can do with this script is that you can make some small modifications before you actually execute the script. So there's a lot more customizability that you can use with MS SQL Scripter. And it's also open source currently, so you can go to our GitHub and make any contributions or feature requests there. And then finally, we have SQL package. And this mainly uses DACPack and backpack files as its main file format. It can also handle relationships automatically, but it uses the BCP mechanism, so it's a little bit faster than MS SQL Scripter. It's also more portable, and another key advantage with SQL package is that it provides validation time error up front. So let's say that you do have an error, it'll tell you right away, as opposed to MS SQL Scripter, which will give you your error message after it runs a bunch of processes. So this might not matter too much when you execute it in not very long periods of time, but if this is something that's about 20 hours, you would want to have that validation much earlier. However, with SQL package, it doesn't have as much customizability, so that's when you would use MS SQL Scripter. So you may be wondering about other database development tools. And if you have been using JetBrains, Eclipse, DataGrip, etc., and prefer to use those tools for your database development, those tools support SQL Server on Linux, and you can continue to use those tools. In summary, we have a suite of awesome GUI and CLI tools to enable your DevOps and automation scenarios for SQL Server on Linux. If you need a GUI tool on Windows, use SSMS or SSDT. If you are using macOS or Linux, or want to try out something new, try SQL Operations Studio or the MS SQL extension for VS Code. If you need a CLI tool, please use SQL CMD or MS SQL CLI for your T-SQL editing. For moving data, we offer BCP, MS SQL Scripter, and SQL Package. Please try out our tools, especially our new ones in public preview, such as SQL Operations Studio and MS SQL CLI. If you have any feedback or feature requests, please submit them on our GitHub. Thank you.